"Can my brother eat the rest of your food? He's hungry," says a homeless girl, holding a child to a woman at a restaurant. Hi, welcome to another story. If you enjoy it, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and turn on notifications. Nancy always seemed out of place in today's world, not because of naivety, but because of a kindness that endured even when no one returned it. She worked as a house cleaner, walking miles every day with the same patched-up bag on her shoulder, a water bottle, a snack wrapped in aluminum foil, and a heart always ready to help whoever was worse off than her. She was known by the neighbors for offering food to whoever knocked at the gate, for feeding street cats, and for leaving coins at bus stops for those in need who didn't want to ask. She did all this quietly, expecting nothing in return. She never raised her voice, never retaliated when treated with disdain in some of the houses where she worked. She was calm, spoke softly, and had restrained gestures. She lived with Donald, her husband, in a simple home earned with great effort after years of honest work. Donald was practical, tough, stuck in routines, and suspicious of anything unexpected. Their daughter, Pamela, grew up between these two worlds, the father's strictness and the mother's serene sweetness. That afternoon, Nancy had left early from one of the houses she usually cleaned. The work had been tough, but she didn't show fatigue. It was just another one of the many mornings she faced with resignation. While she was tying the band she used to hold her hair, she heard her employer calling her from the kitchen. "Where are you going to eat?" he asked, not taking his eyes off his phone. Nancy replied with her usual polite tone. "I'm going home, sir. It's far, but I always eat there anyway." He looked up, made a displeased face, and shook his head. "All that just to have lunch? You're going to end up fainting on the way. Stay here. Take this." He handed her a folded bill. Nancy hesitated. "No need, sir. I insist. Eat nearby today. You deserve to rest a little," he said, already going back to typing on his phone. It was because of that gesture that Nancy, shortly after, found herself sitting in a neighborhood restaurant she wouldn't have visited on her own. The place was simple, but more comfortable than the spots where she usually stopped. She ordered a modest plate and sat there alone, eating quietly. The sound of the cutlery hitting the plate was the only noise around that seemed to matter to her. Then she noticed the eyes. First she felt them, then she looked. A girl was standing a few feet away, skinny, tangled hair, clothes stained with dirt. In her arms she carried a small boy who clung to her tightly. Both were dirty, their eyes sunken, skin too thin for their bodies. The girl stared at Nancy's plate without blinking. "Can my brother eat the rest of your food? He's hungry," the girl said. Nancy looked at the plate, still half full. The statement was direct, straightforward, but not aggressive. The boy didn't even react, as if too tired for anything. With a tight heart, Nancy answered kindly, "This plate is already used, dear, but wait a moment." She raised her hand and called the waiter. "Can you bring 2 plates of the same, please? Full ones." The waiter hesitated, looked at the 2 children, and then at Nancy, but said nothing. He just nodded and went back to the kitchen. The girl stood still, unsure if she could come closer. Her brother kept clinging to her as if the fear of letting go was greater than the hunger. Nancy made a calm gesture with her hand, signaling for them to sit. The girl approached slowly, as if she couldn't believe it. She sat with her brother on her lap, her gaze still fixed on the food that was about to come. When the plates arrived, their reaction was silent. Tears filled their eyes, but neither cried. They only nodded in quiet thanks. They ate hurriedly yet carefully, chewing every bite as if it needed to last. Nancy watched them silently, feeling a deep pain in her chest, but also a strange peace. When they finished eating, the girl wiped her brother's face with her hands and helped him stand. She got up slowly, adjusted his clothes carefully, held his hand, and looked at Nancy one last time. "Thank you," she said, her voice low but steady. Nancy nodded, moved by the sincere tone. The girl then turned and began walking with measured steps toward the door, still holding her head high. She didn't seem ashamed, just tired, used to leaving. "Wait," Nancy said. The girl stopped. She turned around, body alert, as if already preparing for a demand, a request for repayment, or a hidden condition. Nancy hesitated, heart racing, mind in doubt. She wanted to do more, but was afraid to invade. Intuition prevailed. She took a deep breath, stepped forward, and said calmly, "Let me help a little more." The girl frowned. "We already ate. It's okay," she said, pulling her brother closer. "There's a place," Nancy said. "Just one quiet place, for you to rest." "No need," the girl replied. "We're used to it." "I know, but still. Come with me, just a little. It's safe." Karen hesitated. She looked at her brother, then back at Nancy. She almost said no, but stayed silent. Nancy's gaze didn't ask, it offered. And it offered sincerely. Only then did the girl, for the first time that day, look Nancy directly in the eye. The look lingered. Then, still without words, she nodded almost imperceptibly. The walk was without conversation. The boy walked slowly, with small steps, always holding his sister's hand. Nancy led, turning back from time to time to confirm they were following. Only once she asked, "What are your names?" "Karen, and he's Christopher." Nancy smiled slightly, but said no more. Karen didn't either. The silence of the journey said more than any explanation could. When they reached the front of a simple house, Nancy stopped. She slowly turned to the two. Karen also stopped, still tense, looking at the closed gate. The boy was tired but steady, holding her hand. "This is my house," Nancy said, turning to them. "And I want you to stay here, for now, until you feel better." Karen stepped back. "We don't want to bother." "You don't bother. You need a place. I have one. And I want that." Karen looked at the house as if still trying to decide if this was real. The boy leaned against her leg, yawning. "It's just for a while," Karen murmured, as if convincing herself more than accepting. "Okay," Nancy said. "For as long as you need." Karen nodded slowly, eyes downcast. And then, for the second time that day, she accepted. When they entered the house, Donald was sitting at the table reading. Hearing the door, he looked up. He saw Nancy entering, followed by an unfamiliar girl and a child. He frowned immediately. "Who are they?" Donald asked. Nancy closed the door carefully and answered with her usual calm voice. "This is Karen, and this is her brother, Christopher." Donald got up. "What is this, Nancy? What's going on?" They were hungry. They'd been on the streets for days. I couldn't leave them behind. Donald looked at Karen, who immediately held her brother tighter. Nancy continued, "I don't know how it's going to be, but I know I couldn't pretend I didn't see." Donald ran his hand over his face. Didn't answer immediately. Looked at Nancy, then at the two. "You brought two strangers into the house without even telling me." "I did, because it was the right thing." Donald snorted, but said nothing more. His discomfort was clear in the way he paced the house. Pamela appeared in the hallway, looked at them strangely, and remained silent, watching the new faces. Karen avoided eye contact. She just stood there, as if she knew her presence wasn't welcome. In the following days, Karen remained nearly mute. She only responded when impossible to avoid, with dry, short sentences, always looking away. Her hardened gaze said what she didn't put into words. She expected nothing from anyone, neither trust nor permanence. It was as if she already knew that all this could end at any moment. Nancy didn't push. She made meals for everyone, washed their clothes with the household laundry, and kept the usual pace, as if nothing new was happening. And yet, everything was changing. Christopher, on the other hand, gradually began showing signs of lightness. He was more sensitive to gestures of affection, more curious. He followed Nancy around the house, observed objects, drew with the pieces of chalk Pamela left around the room. He didn't talk much, but smiled occasionally, especially when he heard music or when Nancy placed some candy on the table. Karen watched him constantly, not letting him get too far or be alone with anyone. She cared for him with the seriousness of an adult, as if the slightest mistake could put them at risk again. Donald avoided the two. He greeted Nancy with a nod in the morning, drank his coffee silently, and went to work. When he returned, he locked himself in the bedroom or watched TV without speaking to anyone. His discomfort was visible in his gestures. Pamela pretended they didn't exist. She passed by them as if they were invisible, locked herself in her room, or went out with her headphones on. The discomfort was everywhere, like a fog nobody mentioned. Nancy tried to keep everything bearable. She kept her routine with the same serenity, acting as if it was normal, as if Karen and Christopher had always been there. One afternoon during lunch, she dared to ask, "Want more rice?" Nancy said gently. "It's okay like this," Karen replied without looking. "Christopher, are you liking the food?" Nancy asked, looking at the boy. He shook his head and answered with a small smile. "It's good." It was the first time Nancy felt there was an opening, still fragile, but real. That same week, she deliberately left some papers and chalk in the living room. When she passed by later, she found a simple drawing of 3 sticks, 2 taller and 1 shorter. "That's me, that's Karen, and that's you," Christopher said, pointing. Nancy smiled. "Can I keep this drawing?" Christopher nodded. Karen watched everything silently from afar, arms crossed. Still, the atmosphere at home remained tense. Donald didn't bring up the subject again, but his presence grew colder every day. Pamela stayed distant until a call from school broke the silence. Nancy was summoned by the coordinator because of offensive remarks Pamela had made about Karen. When she returned, she went straight to her daughter's room. Pamela was lying down, listening to music. Nancy sat on the edge of the bed. "Can we talk?" she asked calmly. Pamela took off her headphones. "If it's about Karen, I already know what they're going to say. The coordinator called me, said you've been talking badly about her at school. I only said what's true. Nobody knows that girl. You brought her out of nowhere. Now she lives here, uses our bathroom, sleeps in our house. You said she was a thief, Pamela. And how do I know she's not?" Nancy took a deep breath before answering. "You don't know. Neither do I. But she was hungry. She lived on the street. That doesn't make her a criminal." "So now you protect her more than me?" Pamela snapped. "It's not about protection. It's about respect. If I have to make mistakes, I'd rather err on the side of helping. I'd rather be wrong trying to do good than be silent watching someone suffer." Pamela was silent, her face turned toward the wall. Nancy got up slowly and left the room without another word. The next morning, while tidying the room, Karen found a clean blouse folded on the bed. On top, a note clipped with a paperclip. "Fits you." She read it. She stood still for a few seconds, holding the paper between her fingers. Looked at the blouse again as if trying to understand what it meant. She didn't mention it to anyone, just carefully put the piece away where she folded her clothes. She spent the day silent, as always, but different inside. Pamela's gesture had unsettled her. It wasn't an excuse, not direct welcoming, but it was something, and it weighed differently. That night, for the first time, Karen went to the kitchen alone. Nancy was putting away the dishes when she heard light footsteps. "He spilled water on the mattress," Karen said, holding the glass. "I cleaned it, but the blanket is still kind of wet." "That's okay. Bring it here. I'll wash it." Nancy replied quietly. Karen hesitated, then said softly, "Sorry." "For what?" Nancy asked. "For everything. We don't know how to live right. But thank you. For the food. For letting us stay. You don't need to thank me. This is yours now, too." Karen nodded almost imperceptibly and went back to her room. That night, Nancy cried alone, not out of sadness, but relief. For the first time, she felt Karen had let go of some of the rigidity that kept her trapped. The next day, passing by the room, Nancy heard Christopher humming softly. Karen was brushing his hair patiently, sitting on the floor. Her expression was no longer tense but caring. A lighter kind of care, as if for a moment she wasn't running away. "Be still, or you'll pull it," she said. "Okay," Christopher replied, laughing. Nancy said nothing, just watched and continued walking toward the kitchen silently. And at that moment, she was sure Karen and Christopher were already part of that place. No one needed to say it out loud. It was in the gesture. It was in the look. And, above all, it was in the silence that no longer hurt as much. Time passed, but changes didn't come in a straight line. There were good days, but also relapses, noises, sideways glances. What had once been just internal resistance soon echoed outside. Discreet comments began circulating in the neighborhood, whispers through half-open doors, assumptions tossed in the air as if people were just repeating what they heard. Small thefts that had occurred long before Karen and Christopher arrived were brought up again as if they had just happened. Distrust, as always, spread faster than the truth. "I heard it was a girl," a neighbor said as she passed the gate. "They said she was skinny, with long hair, looked like the one in your house now, Nancy," another said without shame. Nancy didn't answer. She just kept sweeping the sidewalk, keeping her pace. But inside, she knew it would grow. And it did. That night, Donald slammed the door harder than usual and sat at the table without greeting anyone. Nancy noticed the heavier silence. She waited for him to finish his meal, then approached cautiously. "Want to talk?" Nancy asked calmly. Donald looked at her. "They're saying things outside." "I know," she replied. "A woman said she saw her messing with coins at a stand. Said she'd been seen around before." "And what do you think?" Nancy asked, staring at him. Donald hesitated. "I don't know, Nancy. I'm trying. But if it's true..." They were on the street, alone. The line between surviving and doing wrong is thin when you have nothing. "Are you saying she stole?" "I'm saying maybe she did what she needed so her brother wouldn't go hungry. But that doesn't define who she is." Donald got up from the table. "If it's true, Nancy, it's not okay. We have a daughter here. And she's the first one learning that the world isn't just black and white." Donald rubbed his face. He was tired. He almost said he wanted the two gone but didn't have the courage to finish the sentence. Instead, he went up to the bedroom without looking back. That same night, after putting Christopher to sleep, Nancy called Karen into the living room. She was sitting in the armchair, hands clasped in her lap, the usual serene tone. "Karen, can I ask you something?" Nancy said. Karen nodded slowly, eyes downcast. "Those things they're saying. That you took coins at a stand, that you were seen on the street. Is it true?" The girl took a long time to answer. Silence stretched. She didn't cry immediately, but her breath trembled. "It was only once," she finally said. "We were very hungry, 2 days with nothing. I saw some coins in a corner in a candy box. I took them. It was quick. I was scared. I ran." Nancy didn't move a muscle, just listened. "I never did that again. Never. It stayed in my head. I felt I was doing wrong. But Christopher was weak, crying at night, and I didn't know what else to do." "I understand, Karen," Nancy said, getting up and going to her. "Thank you for telling me." Karen then cried silently, eyes wet, but without sobs, face still tense, as if she didn't know whether she'd be punished or forgiven. Nancy hugged her firmly, without judgment, as she always did. The next morning, Donald was up early. Still lying down, with the room in shadow, he noticed Nancy already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed. He turned to the side, eyes still half closed. "You didn't sleep well," he murmured. "I was thinking," Nancy answered softly. Donald propped himself on his elbows, watching her silently for a few seconds until she spoke. "I talked to Karen yesterday, asked if what they're saying is true." Donald just nodded, attentive. She confirmed. "Said she took some coins once, at a stand, when they were still on the street. They hadn't eaten for 2 days. Christopher was weak, crying from hunger. She saw the coins and took them. She said she felt ashamed, scared, and since that day, she's carried that weight." Donald looked at the ceiling, saying nothing. She cried. Didn't defend herself, just told me. Said she promised herself she'd never do it again. I believed her. Nancy didn't expect him to answer, and he didn't. But he lay there, processing everything. It hit him in a way hard to put into words. Minutes later, in the kitchen, Nancy was making coffee when she heard the tall cabinet open. Donald pulled out an old box, faded on the edges, and placed it on the table. He opened it slowly. Inside, 2 pairs of shoes, one very small, child-sized, and the other bigger, a simpler model from when Pamela was almost a teenager. They were used but clean and well cared for. "For Pamela," Donald said, looking at his own feet. "You want me to keep them?" Nancy asked, stopping what she was doing. "No. They're for them." That was all he said. But in that restrained, direct, no-drama gesture, Nancy understood what he still didn't know how to say with words. Days passed. Karen started lowering her guard more often, but not without stumbles. A few weeks later, she had an intense argument with Pamela. It was full of sharp accusations. "Do you think you fool everyone?" Pamela said in the middle of the kitchen. "You play the victim, but you know how to manipulate well." "I never asked to stay here," Karen retorted, her voice breaking. "Do you think I wanted this?" The argument ended with Karen leaving the house with Christopher in her arms. They stayed away for 2 days. Nancy went looking for them and found them near an abandoned market, the same place Karen had mentioned weeks before during a conversation. "Why did you come back here?" Nancy asked without reproach. "Because here no one expects anything from me," Karen answered. "In your house it feels like I have to prove something all the time. Here, I just exist." Nancy didn't try to argue. She just opened her arms and hugged her. "The house will always be open to you. You don't have to prove anything." That late afternoon, Karen returned with Christopher. She entered silently, avoiding everyone's eyes, but went straight to Pamela's room. She knocked once on the slightly open door and waited. Pamela looked at her expressionless, sitting on the bed with a notebook on her lap. "Sorry," Karen said. Her voice was low but steady. "For yelling, for leaving like that." Pamela hesitated, then replied, "It's okay." There was no hug or long talk, but something was settled there. In the following days, Karen began to move differently. She started washing dishes after meals, organizing the room more carefully, folding clothes attentively. It wasn't an obligation. It was a gesture. Nancy noticed everything but never commented. Little by little, Karen began learning from the details. How Nancy organized the pantry, how she prepared the food, how she put filtered water for Christopher before bed. She didn't say she was learning. She just imitated, observed, and replicated, like someone who wanted to give back, even silently. Almost a year had passed since that first meal at the restaurant when everything turned upside down. A social worker knocked on the door with a notebook in hand and a serious look. "We received an anonymous complaint," she said, "about possible child labor exploitation." Donald froze. Nancy calmly offered a chair. The woman declined with a gesture. "I need to understand how this girl lives here. If she is being forced to work, if she has access to school, if she lives freely." "Karen isn't a servant," Nancy said serenely. "She lives here, as a daughter." The social worker looked down the hallway, where Karen appeared holding Christopher's hand. "Do you help around the house?" the woman asked. Karen hesitated. "I help, but because I want to. No one tells me to." "Are you studying?" the social worker asked firmly. Karen lowered her eyes. "Not yet." The woman made a note. "That needs to be resolved. Her age requires enrollment in a regular school. The same goes for her brother." "Understood," Nancy replied without resistance. "I'll take care of it as soon as possible." The next day, Nancy left early with Karen and Christopher. They returned hours later, each with a backpack on their backs and folded papers in their hands. "You're really going to school?" Pamela asked, surprised when she crossed paths with Karen in the hall. "I'll try," Karen answered. Gradually, the household routine adjusted. Karen started waking up early, putting on a simple uniform, combing Christopher before they left. She did her homework seriously and came back with notebooks carefully filled out. She started asking Nancy the meaning of harder words, read little by little, and kept materials organized. It was as if that gesture, going to school, was the first thing she did for herself, not just for her brother. Christopher came back from school with even more energy. He showed drawings, stuck stickers in makeshift notebooks, talked about games and stories with sparkling eyes. He was lighter, more cheerful. Then came the requests for documentation. Nancy presented proof of residence, copies of enrollment forms, vaccination records. Pamela wrote a statement by hand. Donald went to the organization to give a testimony. Even some neighbors, once suspicious, confirmed they never saw mistreatment. Quite the opposite. After weeks of waiting, the official response came. Temporary custody granted. When asked if she wanted to proceed with adoption, Nancy replied firmly yet lightly, "If needed, I'll do it. But for me, the bond that matters is the one lived, not the stamped one." From then on, something truly changed. Donald began waking earlier on Sundays. He sat with Christopher on the porch and taught him card games, showed him how to fix simple things around the house. He was still a man of few words, but smiled more. Pamela and Karen, still different in almost everything, started sharing space without noise. One washed dishes, the other dried. One grabbed the charger, the other left notes on the door. The silence between them was no longer a barrier. It was care, even if discreet. And Nancy carried on as always. She made coffee, hung clothes, washed the two siblings' backpacks as if they had always been hers, like someone carrying the world with gentleness, without needing to raise her voice. She just did. She just was. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. See you in the next story.